Masech the Shabbos Daf Chaf Gimel. We're in the Chanuka Sugya. We learned yesterday about the brachas that are made at Hadlokis Neves Chanuka, and Reb Chia Bar Ashi Amar Rav said when you madlik Neves Chanuka you have to make a bracha, and we asked the question, why does the Gemara tell me you have to make a bracha? Every mitzvah you make a bracha, and then we got the secret. At a few lines later, the Gemara asked, Heichen Sivanu. How do you say Asher Kedushan Mitzvah Sivanu? Sivanu where? What pasuk? Where does it come from? There's no pasuk. At the time of the Chanuka miracle, there were no Nevi'im. Then the last Navi was Malachi. He died, give or take a few years, 40 years into the second Beis HaMikdash. The miracle of Chanuka happened about 200 years into the second Beis HaMikdash. There wasn't a Navi for 160 years approximately. So there's no Navi. Who made up this mitzvah? You want to light Chanuka candles to commemorate a miracle? It's a very, very nice idea. But to utter God's name, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, and then say, Vitzivanu, he commanded me, where did he command me? So remember we said yesterday in the Gemara Megillah, Daf Yudalit, Rashi explains that Purim is different. In Masechta Megillah, which deals with Purim, the Gemara doesn't ask, V'heichen Sivanu. How can you say, Asher Kedushan Mitzvah Sivanu al Mikra Megillah? Heichen Sivanu, where did God command me? The answer is simple, Rashi says, because at the time of the Purim miracle, which is before the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, Chagi, Zechariah, and Malachi, the last three Nevi'im, were still alive, and they were part of the group that instituted Purim, and as Nevi'im, we can say V'tzivanu. But by the time Chanuka comes, 200 years later, there are no Nevi'im. So while there are Tanoim alive, the early Tanoim in the second Beis HaMikdash, there's no Nevi'im. And who said that Tanoim can make a mitzvah and say, you can say that Sivanu, God commanded me? So Gemara said there are two psukim. Rav Avia said lo sasur. The pasuk says you shall not deviate from what Chachamim say. And therefore, if Chachamim say light Chanuka candles, you have to do it. And therefore you don't deviate, and therefore you can say V'tzivanu because God told you don't deviate. We mentioned the problem yesterday. Don'ts are not the source for a bracha. We don't make a bracha Asher Kedushan Mitzvah V'tzivanu lo le'echol chazir. We don't make such a bracha. A bracha is on a positive commandment. Eat matzah, we make a bracha. Take a lulav and daled minim, we make a bracha. Put on your tefillin, we make a bracha. We don't make a bracha and not doing something. And here the words of the pasuk are lo sasur, don't deviate from the words of the Chachamim. It's a pasuk in the Torah, but it's a don't deviate. Don'ts do not create a bracha. So that's a problem with Rav Avia. Rav Nechemia said the pasuk Yishala Vicha V'Yageitcha Zekenecha V'Yarulach. In Pashas Hazinu, it says, ask your father, he'll tell you, ask your elders, and they will advise you or give you information. So therefore, we have this idea which we call Mesorah. We go back generations to know what's right and wrong, just the opposite of what's happening today. Today we're being told you ask the new generation, and they'll tell you what's right and wrong, because the old guys and the old gals didn't know what they were talking about, what they call in America today, cancel culture. So we are in a different position as Jews. We have a Shalom Vicha V'Yageitcha Zekenecha V'Yarulach. Therefore, we have in the Torah a statement that when you're told something by your elders, you shall listen. So here we have a positive statement. The problem with this positive statement is that it's not one of the 613 mitzvahs. So whereas the first pasuk, Rav Avia, is a pasuk in the Torah, and it's one of the 613 mitzvahs, but it's a negative. Thou shalt not deviate. Now, how does a negative create a bracha? The second pasuk is a positive. You shall ask your elders, and they will tell you, but it's not one of the 613 mitzvahs to say V'tzivanu. Okay. Now we're entering a very, very, very interesting sugya. Very interesting. That's Nagea, all kinds of issues. What do we have right now? We're saying that when you're doing a rabbinic mitzvah, a purely rabbinic mitzvah, you can make a bracha and say b'tzivanu. That's the premise we're working under now. Remember, Purim is not part of this discussion. Purim is not a rabbinic mitzvah. Purim is called Divrei Kabbalah. It's on a higher level because at the time that Purim was established, there were Nevi'im who were part of the group that established Purim and Mikra Megillah. That makes Purim completely different than Chanukah. Chanukah, there are no Nevi'im. So just historically, Purim occurs after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash at the end of the 70 years of the Babylonian exile. That's Purim. The second Beis HaMikdash has not been built. The Nes of Chanukah occurs 200 years into the second Beis HaMikdash. Between Purim and Chanukah, there's over 200 years. Chanukah comes after Purim. At Purim, there are Nevi'im, so this is not part of the discussion. A mitzvah that's instituted by Nevi'im is called Divrei Kabbalah. That's what it's called, for whatever reason. Here we have Purim, here we have Chanukah, which is a completely rabbinic mitzvah. Tanoim made the mitzvah. And our premise right now is that Tanoim, rabbis, when they make a mitzvah, they can say, not today's rabbis, but in those days, Tanoim, they can establish a mitzvah, you say B'tzivonu. A rabbinic mitzvah gets a B'tzivonu. So now the Gemara has a kasha. Mosef Rav Amram. Rav Amram had a question on this entire premise of making a tzivanu on a rabbinic mitzvah. Hadamai. Damai is something that people, it's a grain, it's a veg fruits where you buy it from the person. In the old days, we called him an Ama Oretz. He's a person that we're not sure whether he took off Trumas. Let's talk about Meiser. We're not sure whether he took off Meiser. Now you buy some grain from this Am Ha'oretz. When you buy it from him, you don't know if he took off Meiser or not. And there's a whole Masechta called Demai. It's a Masechta Mishnayis in Zeroyim. Demai. So you buy this grain from this Am Ha'oretz and you don't know if he took off Meiser. You're supposed to take off Meiser misafik. Take off Meiser. The Chachamim said you should take off Meiser. So what's the rule of the Demai? Ma'arvim boy, somebody bought this grain, which we call Demai, and Ma'arvim boy. Okay. You take the grain, you bake it into some challah and matzah. You're allowed to use that challah and matzah to make an erev chatzeros or an erev techumen. You want to walk more than 2,000 amas outside the city, you have to put an erev there. You can use the matzah or the challah that you baked from the grain that came from the mai. You can use it for an erev techumen. You can use it for an erev chatzeros. We learned about multiple houses that live inside a fence that has a common courtyard. And you want to be able to carry inside that courtyard on Shabbos. So what do? You make an Erev Chatzeros. You need matzah again and challah again. If you baked it from the Mai, you're allowed to use it. Umishtatfim boy. And you can make a sheet of mavos. That's that public area that connects two sets of courtyards. Okay, the whole point is you can use it to make it an Erev. Umavarchin olav, and Rashi learns if you eat the mai, in other words, you bought the grain from the Amoretz, you didn't take off meiser like you're supposed to midrabanan, because remember, we don't know if the Amoretz took off meiser, it's a suffix. The Chacham said we want you to take off meiser, and he didn't, and he baked it, and he now is eating it. He can make a hamotzi, he can make a bracha on it. and you can bench on it. Here's the key point of Rav Amram. Umafrishin oisoi orum. If you want to take off meiser, as the Chachamim told you to do from this Demai, you can take it off while you're naked. Now, what does that right away tell you? A person's naked, he's not dressed, and he has Demai, and he wants to separate meiser from it as the Chachamim told him to do. And he's naked. What does that tell you about taking off meiser from the mai? You don't have to make a bracha. If you have to make a bracha when you take off the meiser from the mai, you can't be naked when you make a bracha. What this memra is telling me is that you don't need to make a bracha when you take off the meiser of the mai. Why? Because what's the source of taking off meiser from the mai? A rabbinic decree. And on a rabbinic decree, you don't make a bracha, which contradicts my Vitzivanu on Chanuka. Ubein hashmoshes, and you can take off the mai bein hashmoshes, meaning Friday afternoon, bein hashmoshes, between Friday and Shabbos, that period of time we don't know if it's Shabbos or Friday. We already do not do malacha bein hashmoshes, and you're not allowed to really take off chumas and maisa bein hashmoshes, but the mai you can take off maisa because it's a suffix. The Am Ha'aretz may have already done it. So bein hashmoshes you can take off the meiser the mai. Okay. The point is you can take off the meiser from the mai while you're naked. So Gemara says, "Vi amrit kol midrabanan boy bracha." And if you're going to tell me anything that's of rabbinic nature needs a bracha, and you can say v'tzivanu hacha kikoy orum hechi mevorech. Here, if he's naked, how can he possibly make a bracha on taking off meiser? The pasuk in the Torah says "V'yamachanecha kadosh," and from there we learn out your encampment should be holy, and we learn out from there that when you're doing a mitzvah, it has to be done in a certain holy way, and even if it's a talking mitzvah, you have to be dressed properly, and your surroundings should be clean, etc. You can't make a bracha when you're naked. So here, if it says you can take off the meiser from the mai while you're naked, what does that tell you? That you don't make a bracha. And yet by Chanuka, which is rabbinic, you tell me to make a bracha. Amar Abaye, so Abaye answers the question. Vadai didivreihem boy bracha. If it's a vadai didivreihem, it's a rabbinic mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah that's absolute. There's no doubt about it. Let's look at the difference here. Abaye catches the difference. When the Chachamim say light Chanuka candles, are they telling you to light Chanuka candles because they're not sure about something? No, they're making a positive decree to commemorate the miracle in the Beis HaMikdash. You are to light Chanuka candles, and on that you can say B'tzivanim. When we come to the Mai, why did Chachamim tell you to take off the Mai? Because we don't know what's going on here. Did the Am Ha'aretz take off Ma'isa, or did he not take off Ma'isa? So the Chachamim said, we're going to be Machmer, and we want you to take off Ma'isa. There you can't say B'tzivanu. One is a Vadai Didivreim, one is an absolute decree from the Chachamim, and one is a decree from the Chachamim because of a suffix. So when it's rabbinic Vadai, like Chanuka, light the menorah, you make a bracha. When it's a rabbinic doubt, we don't know if he took off Ma'isa, so take it off, you don't make a bracha. Vadi Didivreim, boy bracha, suffix Didivreim, loy boy bracha. Something that's something. The reason why the Chachamim told you to do it is because they're in doubt about something. You don't make a bracha. Rabbi Yisai right away jump on Abaye. What's the immediate kasha to jump on Abaye? Baruch Hashem, we live in Eretz Yisrael, so we don't remember the kasha anymore. But in the olden days, when we lived in Chutz La'aretz, there was something called Yontif Sheni Shel Goliath. Why do you keep a second day Yontif? Because there was a doubt. People in Chutz La'aretz didn't know when Beis Din decreed Rosh Chodesh, and the messengers couldn't get out everywhere to notify people when Rosh Chodesh. So imagine, for example, Beis Din establishes Rosh Chodesh Nisan today, and they announce today is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. What happens? They now don't have telephones, they don't have fax machines, they don't have SMS. They have to start sending messages all over Eretz Yisrael to tell everybody it is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and they have to get this message to everyone, including the Jews who are in Bavel. They have to get it there so that they can make Pesach on the right day. But if the messengers don't get to the most distant place within 15 days, then the folks in the distant places have to keep 2 days Pesach, because they definitely know Rosh Chodesh is either 1 day or Rosh Chodesh is 2 days. When the end of Adar comes, they know that it's either going to be Adar 1 day Rosh Chodesh or Adar 2 days Rosh Chodesh. So if they never get a message in the most distant places, they know that Pesach is going to be 1 or 2 days. If Rosh Chodesh Nisan was 1 day, then Pesach would be a day earlier. If Rosh Chodesh Adar Nisan was 2 days, Pesach would start a day later. So if they didn't get the message on time, they had to keep 2 days Yom Tov. Why did they keep 2 days Yom Tov? Because of a suffix, a doubt. Now, on the second day Yom Tov, in those times when we kept 2 days Yom Tov, did you make Kiddush?
Yeah.
You made Kiddush,
Right.
right?
Right.
So you made a bracha. On the second day Yom Tov, you made a bracha, even though the reason you kept the second day Yom Tov is because of a rabbinic decree based upon a suffix. So Abaya just told me a rule. When there's a rabbinic mitzvah that you do that has no doubt attached to it, like Chanuka, like the Chanuka candles, you make a bracha. When it's a rabbinic mitzvah that you do because there's a doubt, like the Mai, you don't make a bracha. And here we have Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golius, where it's observed because of a doubt, and yet you make a bracha. So the Gemara asks, Yom Tov Sheni, the second day Yom Tov, the suffix Devrayamhu, it's only a rabbinic decree because of a doubt, Uboy bracha, and you have to make a bracha. If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says, Uboy bracha. Everybody see the Rashi? Ba'ei bracha. It's about a third of the way up from the bottom. Rashi says, Uba'e bracha. What bracha? Kiddush hayom. You make Kiddush. Is there a problem here with the Rashi? If the point here is a bracha, then Rashi's correct. Abaya said that a rabbinic mitzvah that is based on a doubt, a suffix, you don't make a bracha. Like taking off ma'aseh d'mai when you're naked. But Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golius is a doubt, and you make Kiddush, and it's a bracha. What's the little problem here? Where did this sugya start? What's the problem word in a bracha? Vitzivanu. That's where we have a problem. Let's say the rabbis say that every Tuesday we'd like you to make a borei pri hagefen and then drink wine. Make a l'chaim every Tuesday, make a borei pri hagefen. Is that a problem? It's not a problem. Do you say Vitzivanu in borei pri hagefen? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei pri hagefen. You didn't say Vitzivanu, and then you're going to drink the wine. So the rabbi said you should drink wine on Tuesdays and make a bracha. Does that present a problem? it doesn't present the problem. The problem here is the Vitzivanu. Now, if you go to Kiddush, is there a Vitzivanu in Kiddush? When you make Kiddush, it's the second day Yontif. And no Vitzivanu. And you're going to drink wine. Is there a Vitzivanu? No Vitzivanu. So the fact that Rashi points out Kiddush Hayoim, it's true that you make Kiddush on the second day Yontif, and that's a bracha. And Abaya said that when something is rabbinic, but it comes from a doubt, you don't make a bracha. And that's why by Demai, which is doubt, you don't make a bracha. So the question is, but I can prove to you do make a bracha on the second day Yontif, you make a bracha. What bracha do you make? Rashi says, Kiddush. There's no Vitzivanu in Kiddush. What's the problem there? So parenthetically, there's a Rabbi Akiva Eger in Masechta Sukkah. Rabbi Akiva Eger says that on Yontif Sheni, for example, the second Seder, when we used to make a second Seder, Leil Pesach, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvoisa v'tzivonu al achilas matzah. Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvoisa v'tzivonu al achilas moror. So on the second night of Pesach, which you're only keeping because of a suffix, a doubt, you do see that there are vitzivanus. And Abaya said that when it's rabbinic and it's only doubt, you don't make a bracha. But we see you do make a bracha on Yontif Sheni Shel Golias. Rashi says Kiddush. Kiddush has an issue. There's no Vitzivanu. But you do have cases where we say Vitzivanu on the second day Yontif, like the second Seder, we say Vitzivanu al achilas matzah, Vitzivanu al achilas mora. So therefore the Gemara's kasha is a good kasha. Abaya, what are you going to say now? So Abaya says, Hasam ki heicha deloy lizulzulei bei. Abaya says, my rule stands. Whenever the Rabbanon make a positive decree, you are to light Chanuka candles, not because I'm in doubt of anything. Light Chanuka candles. Even if it's rabbinic, make a bracha. Where the rabbis make a decree because they have doubt about something, I don't know if the Am Ha'oretz took off Meiser and therefore it's the Mai. You can take off the Meiser naked. You don't need to make a bracha. Then why do I make a bracha on Yontif Sheni Shel Golias? It's a doubt. Why do I say Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvoisa V'tzivonu al achilas matzah the second night of Pesach? How do I say that? The answer is a special rule for Yontif Sheni Shel Golias. We see this in numerous places. Otherwise, people won't take Yontif Sheni seriously. You're living in Chutz La'aretz. Chas v'sholom. You're living in Chutz La'aretz. And the rabbis say you need to make a second Seder. Okay, so all the kindlech get together for the second Seder, and you put the matzah, the wine, everything on the table. You take out the matzah, you wash, you take out the matzah, and you tell your kindlech before you wash, last night when we ate matzah at the first Seder, we made a hamoitzi lechem in ha'oretz, and asher kiddushanu mitzvoisa v'tzivonu al achilas matzah. But tonight, kindlech, we're only going to make a hamoitzi. We're not going to make an al achilas matzah because it's really not a mitzvah tonight. It's only a suffix. And you're going to tell the kindlech the same thing by the morah. Last night we made asher kiddushanu mitzvoisa v'tzivonu al achilas morah, but we're not making that bracha tonight because tonight is only a suffix. How do you think those kindlech are going to grow up feeling about the second day Yontif? It's not really Yontif. We don't make the bracha. People give an importance when you make a bracha. If you make a bracha, oh, it's a mitzvah. If you don't make a bracha, it's not a mitzvah. So Chazal were very strict about this Yontif Sheni Shel Golias. they wanted people to understand that the second day Yontif must be kept in order not to be mezalzel in it, in order not to degrade it. So they said you make a bracha. Special exception, Abaya says, where there's a doubt in a rabbinic mitzvah, don't make a bracha. Yontif Sheni Shalgolius is different, otherwise people won't take it seriously. And you see, Loyalenu, there's been for the longest time this drive. It started in the Reform movement and moved to the conservative movement, that they don't keep whatever they keep. I don't even know what they keep anymore. But to the extent that they keep Yontif, they knocked off the second day Yontif completely. There's no second day. There's not a second day Rosh Hashanah. There's not a second day Pei. Nothing. So Chachamim were worried about Zilzulei Bahu. The people are not going to take Yontif Sheni seriously. If you tell them on the first night you make a bracha, but the second night you don't make a bracha, they're going to stop keeping the second night altogether. So Abaya says Yontif Sheni shall go exception to the rule. I'll tell you an interesting story in a second. Rava has a different answer. Rava Oma, Rov Ame Ha'oretz Ma'asrin Hein. The kasha from the Mai is not a kasha to begin with, because really you make a bracha even on a rabbinic mitzvah that comes out of a doubt. But the Mai is not even a doubt, because Chachomim said that the vast majority of Amei Ha'oretz do take off Ma'isa. It's a small minority that don't take off Ma'isa. So therefore, l'chumra, we're telling you to take off Ma'isa on the Demai. And that kind of minor doubt, you don't make a bracha, because there's a roiv, there's a presumptive majority of even Amei Ha'oretz that take off Ma'isa. Therefore, you don't make a bracha on the Mai. There's the difference between Abaye and Rava is great. Abaye says that the reason you don't make a bracha on the Mai is it's because a rabbinic decree based upon a doubt. And Abaye says that's a rule. A rabbinic decree that's based upon a doubt, no bracha. Only exception is Yontif Sheni. Rava says the opposite. A rabbinic mitzvah that has its source in doubt, you do make a bracha. Opposite Abaye. So why don't you make a bracha on the Mai? The Mai is an exception, because we have a presumptive majority that do take off Ma'isa. This is a chumrah on a chumrah on a chumrah on a chumrah, and therefore here we don't make a bracha. It's two opposite shittas. Abaye says when the source of rabbinic decree is a doubt, no bracha. Yontif Sheni is the exception. Rava says the opposite. When there's a rabbinic decree that has its source in the doubt, you always make a bracha. The exception is the Mai, where you don't make a bracha. Why? Because presumptively the Maisa was already taken. I'll tell you a very interesting story about this business with bracha and taking things seriously. I don't remember the exact year. It was when Richard Nixon was president of the United States. And the Arabs imposed an oil embargo. Eliezer, you remember the oil embargo?
Yes, I remember the oil embargo. I do.
Yeah, we all remember the oil embargo because there was no gasoline to be bought in America.
Right.
And if you needed gasoline, different states had different rules. So in New York, they had odd and even. If the last number on your license plate was even, you were able to go to a gasoline station, gasoline, I think Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. If the last number was odd, you were able to get gasoline Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There was a kanzamaisa. And there were stories where people would go to gasoline stations with guns, and they would shoot people. They jumped ahead of them online. Those are the days, remember, people started putting locks on their gasoline tanks, because during the night, people would funnel gasoline out of your tank and steal your gasoline.
I had a lock.
A lock.
A lock. A lock.
So in those days, Richard Nixon, I forgot how it worked. In spring, what happens in spring? Spring is spring backwards.
Right.
jump, fall,
Spring
forward,
ahead.
and
Spring ahead.
spring ahead.
Right.
Right? So you spring ahead. Richard Nixon that year, by executive order, kept the clock in the same place. And the idea was somehow or other, there would be more sunlight during the day and people would use less electricity. They were trying to use less power. At any rate, he lengthened, how did it work? I'm sorry, by not going into spring forward, I know this is what happened. The day remained shorter. So like by the time May came, Netz Hachama was like 8 o'clock in the morning. So there became a problem. From people who need to daven, they need to be at work at 8:30, and Netz is at 8 o'clock in the morning. And you're not allowed to put on your tefillin before Alois Hashacha, even B'di'evi, you're not allowed to put on your tefillin at night. So it was a whole shiloh, what do you do now? By the time you get to work, it's Netz. So they asked Rav Moshe certain shilohs about when you can put on your tefillin. The bottom line of the story is Rav Moshe said you can put on your tefillin at a very early time, whatever that time was, you can put on your tefillin, and you can daven until Baruch Hu, and then pick up from davening when you get to work. Okay. So the Rabbanim who asked Rav Moshe this shaila said, if the person puts on his tefillin that early, can he make a bracha when he puts on the tefillin? After all, it's a shaila if you can make a bracha on the tefillin that early. So Rav Moshe said, yes, they should make a bracha when they put on tefillin. So they asked him, but it's a shaila if you're allowed to make a bracha then. So Rav Moshe said, listen, if you tell a person that he should put on his tefillin, but he's not allowed to make a bracha, and then he should go to work, he's not going to put on the tefillin at all. Because he only understands that he's doing the mitzvah of tefillin when he makes a bracha on the tefillin. The way a Jew puts on his tefillin is he puts on his tefillin and makes a bracha, and that's the indication to him he's doing the mitzvah of tefillin. If you tell a Jew, put on your tefillin, but don't make a bracha, he already understands there's a suffix, it's a doubt, is it really a mitzvah? The end is going to be, they're going to be mezalzel in putting on the tefillin, they won't put on the tefillin at all. So he said they should make a bracha. So this is what we see in the Gemara here. Abaya said that on Yontif Sheni Shel Goliath, even though the reason why Jews in Chutz La'aretz keep a second day Yontif is because of a suffix, they don't know which day Yontif is. And if it's a suffix, how do you make a bracha? It's a suffix. How do you make alachilas matzah on the second night of Pesach? How do you make an alachilas matzah the second night of Pesach? According to Rashi, we learned here, how do you make kiddush? It's a suffix. You don't know what day it is. You can't make a bracha. So Gemara says that the Chachamim said, if I tell you to make a second Seder, but don't make any brachas, don't make kiddush, and don't make alachilas matzah, and don't make alachilas matzah, just eat the maror, but don't make alachilas maror. Eat the matzah, and make a hamoitzi, but don't make alachilas matzah, then people are going to stop keeping the second Seder altogether. Because if you don't make a bracha, people assume that the mitzvah is not serious. So there's this concept of Yontif Sheni Lo L'Zilzal B'Hu. Again, we have a machlokes Abaya and Rava here, whether a rabbinic mitzvah that has its source in a doubt, whether it gets a bracha. Abaya says any rabbinic mitzvah that has its source in a doubt, no bracha. Yontif Sheni is an exception so that people don't degrade it. Rava says just the opposite. Every rabbinic mitzvah that has its source in doubt, you do make a bracha. Taking off meiser from the mai, where you don't make a bracha, is the exception. because it's a chumrah and a chumrah and a chumrah, because we presumptively believe that Amei Ha'aretz do take off Ma'aser.